Hello and welcome to the Rob Burgess Show. I'm of course your host, Rob Burgess. On this, our 112th episode, our returning guest is Sarah Kendzior. You first heard Sarah Kendzior on episodes 70, 80, 89, and 99. Sarah Kendzior is best known for her reporting on St. Louis, her coverage of the 2016 election, and her academic research on authoritarian states. She is currently an op-ed columnist for the Globe and Mail, and she was named by Foreign Policy as one of the 100 people you should be following on Twitter to make sense of global events. Her reporting has been featured in many publications including Politico, Slate, The Atlantic, Fast Company, The Chicago Tribune, Teen Vogue, and The New York Times. Her new book, The View from Flyover Country, Dispatches from the Forgotten America, was published April 17th and is now a New York Times-bestseller. And now on to the show.
Hello?
Hey, Sarah, it's Rob.
Hey, how are you?
Oh, pretty good. Thanks for taking the time to talk to me again. I appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, no problem.
Yeah, well, first of all, I could congratulate you on becoming a New York Times bestselling author. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, so, I just finished reading the book, and it's great, but, I'm kind of reading from the dates it was published, and you saying that you'd originally published these all these years ago. It's been quite a journey from the time it was originally conceived till becoming a New York Times bestseller, so.
Yeah, no, it's sad to me in many ways that these essays still stand up, because the problems that I described, not only did not get resolved, but became much worse under Trump, and unfortunately I think will continue to become much worse.
Yeah. Does it feel weird to still be talking about stuff from so long ago? Because I know I read stuff I wrote years ago, and I keep wishing I could change things that I wrote and switch them around.
Yeah, it's definitely weird. One of the strangest things is that at the time I was writing those essays, which was between 2012 and 2014, I felt like our country was in crisis. I felt a sense of urgency. And then now I look back at that era, and I don't want to quite say with nostalgia, because that's not true, but more, this was a time when a lot of the problems that we're facing now could have been fixed if those problems had been acknowledged, if people had been proactive. And of course, there were people out there trying to fix them. It's not like everything was completely avoided and ignored. But, this situation festers and sort of burns for so long that it eventually leads to something like the emergence of a demagogue, a collapse of checks and balances, and the situation we have on our hands now. And that was frustrating in rereading it. Like, I had to read the whole thing out loud because I did the Audible version, which was, a super weird experience. It's like 15 hours of just, reading my own writing. By the end, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe people are going to read this book and not, slit their wrists. It's so depressing. But, but it's still, I now know every word by heart. And I was like, oh man, I wish, I've been feeling this way for years. I wish people had acted sooner, and of course, I'm still feeling that today.
Right. Well, absolutely. And one of the things I really like that you talk about in this book is kind of the jobless recovery. And they keep talking about, things are getting better. And, you and I live in the Midwest, and, we see all these bombed out places that are abandoned and not really going to look like they're going to come back. And it's like, what recovery? I don't see a recovery. And it's like, they're talking about jobs, but the jobs that you can't live on, you mean?
Yes, that's what's so frustrating, because underneath, all of the horrors that we have to deal with now that are new, the threat of nuclear war, the Nazis, the children being snatched from their parents by the state, underneath all that are these day-to-day issues that, the majority of the country have no savings. Most people can't pay their bills. Most people have enormous debt. There aren't opportunities for you, whether you went to college or you didn't go to college. And in places like where we live, where you drive in inner cities that have crumbled for decades, and you go into suburbs and you find endless abandoned malls and emptied out strip malls, and, just emptiness, lots, things, grass growing over pavement. And when I bring people in from out of town that come from New York or DC or something, they're so startled by this, but I'm like, this is pretty typical. This is what a typical city outside of these very few, extremely prosperous and extremely expensive places looks like in America now. And it's just a reality that it doesn't get, portrayed that much, I think, on the news or to the general public, even though we are the general public.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I really appreciated that you touched on in the book was the plight of adjunct professors, because I think I mentioned before, my wife was a religious studies major, and her plan was in college to become a professor, and then, partway through, she kind of figured out what you talk about here is that it's a big scam, and it's basically like, you're buying a lottery ticket that one day maybe you'll be a tenured professor, and you're just going to live in abject poverty for years up until then. So that's really frustrating, because it seems like being a professor, that's a very distinguished career, and it's like, but yeah, maybe if you get it, if you're one of the lucky people that lands one of those jobs, and otherwise, good luck. So
yeah, absolutely. And I had switched myself from journalism that collapsed in the early 2000s into academia. And what I kind of liked at the time, I had a full ride to Watch U, so that was all paid for, and I liked that kind of stability, getting a stipend. But I knew that once you got an academic job, it's like, finally, here's some sort of career path with job security. And then, of course, that collapsed 2 years into my own doctoral studies. It collapsed in 2008 with the general recession and never recovered. But yeah, it is like winning a lottery ticket. It's amazing to me that so many years after I first started writing about that, the problem hasn't gotten better at all. I think the number of adjuncts has actually gone up. I think it was around 70% when I was writing this essay. Now it's more like 80. You have a backlog of graduates who've never been able to find work. And, one thing that I think is really remarkable is you look at fields like the humanities or the social sciences, and, people are always like, what can you do with that degree? I, of course, have put my degree, my expertise in authoritarian states, unfortunately, to studying Donald Trump, which is really not what I set out to do as a plan. But, I look at like one of the biggest issues facing us, which is social media and this complete restructuring of communication and politics and how we interact, and of privacy. All these issues that people who have expertise in the humanities and social sciences could really understand in different ways. And it seems like a problem that would solve itself. Like if these tech companies would hire people, with this background to maybe try to address some of these topics, to not just have them addressed by people who study algorithms or computers or quantitative data, but bring this qualitative aspect. And, there's no kind of, thinking in that way. I just sometimes think in my head, I'm like, you can solve two problems at once here in a really positive way, but, that's definitely not the direction our country's going in terms of how they deal with things. So.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, on a little bit of a lighter note, I did see you on Late Night with Seth Meyers, and I have to ask, what was it like meeting Ice-T?
It was great. He's so nice. He was backstage. And, the thing is my mom is this huge Ice-T fan. She watches him on Law & Order. It's just really funny because when I was 12, I bought the Body Count cassette. I'm sure it was on cassette back then. It was Top Killer, and I was playing it, and I was all into Ice-T, and she was pissed at me because it's just all profanity, which is ironic because my mom swears more than anyone. I probably heard more profanity from her than from Ice-T. But now for her, she's an old lady who loves Ice-T. He was really nice and took a photo with me, and I got the photo framed, and I gave it to my mom for Mother's Day. that was definitely the weirdest Mother's Day gift I've ever given. But he was so nice. I told him my mom is a really big fan of his, and he was like, "Oh, is she here?" And I was like, "No, she lives in another city." He's like, "Oh, I love meeting people's moms." It was just, the Ice-T of 1991, everything about it. I kept thinking 1991 me would be so confused because it's I'm going on late night television with Ice-T, who's now beloved for playing a cop on television, to talk about Donald Trump being a secret asset of the Kremlin. I mean, just everything about that sentence is insane. And so, it's just my life took a really weird turn, but I guess it's true for a lot of people, including Ice-T, I suppose.
Oh, sure, absolutely. No one more than Ice-T, definitely. But yeah, I also saw you on Morning Joe, and I appreciated the little comment you had about how they're like, oh, well, we know how Trump got elected. You're like, yeah, you do.
Sure you do. Yeah, I don't think they totally understood what I meant. And, I am glad that they finally seem to realize that Trump is an extremely dangerous autocrat. I don't quite know what to make of them. Like, there are some people, not many people, in news that I'm furious at. I'm very angry to this day about their role in propping up Trump, especially in 2015, 2016. And, of course, Joe and Mika were two of the people who did that. They were also openly being blackmailed by Trump, being threatened by Trump. He was saying he was going to reveal details of their relationship, which is basically like a open secret. But that makes me feel a little more sympathetic to them because I don't know quite what they were dealing with. And we know that Trump threatens, and his goon squad, especially Michael Cohen, threaten people's lives. They threaten journalists with physical harm and with violence. And I wouldn't necessarily be surprised if that was something that entered into play for them. At the same time, though, I wish that there was some sort of, reckoning moment that people would share and apologize for the damage that they did. Because if it weren't for the media, we likely wouldn't have, babies put in cages in concentration camps on American soil right now. Yeah. And so, I'm always going to be furious at them for that.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, we've been dancing around it here, so we may as well just get right into it. So I really wanted to talk about the article that you had in the Globe and Mail about the child separation policy, and one line that jumped out to me was, you say, the GOP, let Mr. Trump choose what the United States is and to make his alternative facts reality, to rewrite laws to suit his needs since he knows the morally weak will make excuses rather than confront their own complicity. That's the whole ball game, it seems. And, we've talked about the complicity of the congressional Republicans before, but I just feel like this was a new low. I haven't ever seen them sink quite this low. So.
Oh, yeah, that they won't stand up on this. When I really truly feel that the majority of the country finds this repugnant. I think even, you see polls that say a slight majority of Republicans were in favor of this policy. I'm guessing that they're not getting accurate information about what that policy is, because most people aren't Republicans, and those who are tend to get their news from places like Fox, which are really playing down the horrific details of that. And so I don't think that we've changed so dramatically as a country that we find jailing children and ripping children from their parents acceptable. So it should not have been hard for Republicans to stand up, and caucus with the Democrats and support, the closure of this in a very forthright and urgent way. A lot of them talked this sort of game about this is not who we are. And it's like, this is who we are because it's who you are letting us become. And you are bowing to the whim of Trump and his administration and people like Jeff Sessions and Stephen Miller. And, they have the choice. Like, people like you or me, like, we can do so much. We can talk about it. We can expose it. We can try to promote and help the organizations that are trying to stop it. But we can't pass a vote. We can't pass a bill. We can't vote on, who represents us until November. But there are people who could just put this to a stop right now. And instead they get on Twitter and they just, bleat about, oh, it's so sad what's happening. Trump should really stop this. And I'm like, you should really stop this. Like, Jeff Flake, John McCain, and some of the Democrats that were late on getting on board as well. Like, it's extremely frustrating because they're acting helpless when they're really just cowards. And that's, at the heart of the problem. They're too cowardly and intimidated to stand up for the weakest people of all, which are, children who don't even, speak English, who are taken away from their parents and who are, emotionally traumatized. It's like, if you're not going to stand up for them, like, my God, who are you? What kind of person are you?
They're the party of family values, didn't you hear? Every child deserves a mother and a father, right? Come on.
And it's amazing to have grown up, in the 80s and 90s, especially when that was really kind of beaten down our heads, like as a result of the rising divorce rate in the 70s. There's the backlash of family values, and they're completely content ripping these families apart, which just shows the extent that they do not see these migrants from Central America as human beings. The dehumanization that Trump has been steadily pushing for years, and others, of course, as well, has taken some effect, I think. And I don't think it's taken effect on the general American public, but it's taken enough of effect on the legislature that I think they felt like they could get away with this without massive public pushback. And I'm glad that pushback did come, but they still haven't resolved the issue.
Right. And I saw that poll where it was like 50-something% of Republicans are okay with this policy, and like you mentioned, it's basically just the most, like, if you've survived and held on this long, what won't you put up with at this point? And I feel like quote unquote reasonable Republicans they don't have a place in this party anymore. So I mean, do you think that people who were Republicans should stay Republicans and try to change it, or just abandon ship at this point? Because it seems like just the worst people ever are the only ones left, because it's like they're okay with this. So
yeah, I feel like that's up to them. It's,
sure.
What has the best pragmatic effect is what they should do. But at this point, it does seem like abandoning ship has the greatest effect. Like Steve Schmidt, who had worked for McCain recently, right. Abandoned ship because the Republicans in the party aren't willing to listen to any of the reasonable people. Like, they're not having any effect in changing the party from within. It's been completely taken over by Trump, by the Klan, by the most extremist elements. And, I think that's fine if they want to leave. I don't know how they could associate themselves under that banner, but I think it's less important, what party people identify with than just what they do in general. How do they treat people? How do they handle these issues? How do they mobilize around these issues? What kind of policies are they going to try to enact if there are people running for office? Like, that's more important than any labels, because I think we've really moved beyond our traditional two-party system into a whole new realm. I wouldn't be surprised if a decade, assuming we're still a democracy and don't just have one party, that a decade we have, multiple parties, like maybe 4 viable parties. I think that might be healthier in some ways. And, our system's broken. I wish that we had a, parliamentary style system at this point, because this unchecked and, monopolized power that Trump has is very unnerving, and he wouldn't be able to be as successful if it was, more equally distributed throughout Congress. I think the assumption, of course, would be that that Congress checks the president. That was always the historical assumption for America, and that assumption has completely failed under his rule.
Right. Yeah, for sure. But I mean, the administration's explanations, like, they didn't even make sense with each other. I mean, it's just in the past few days, it's been one thing after another. First, it's not happening, period. It's just not happening. And okay, it's happening, but it's not so bad, and it's like a summer camp, and also justified by the Bible. And then, okay, it's fine, it's happening, it's bad, but Obama did it first. It's his fault. And then it's the parents' fault for doing this, and then it's the Democrats' fault for not agreeing to use these kids as a bargaining chip to pay for the border wall instead of Mexico. And then, okay, it's happening, it's bad, but we're going to not separate families anymore, but we're not going to, the ones that are already separated, we're not going to do anything about them. It's like they want all the cruelty of it without having to have any of the responsibility for the consequences. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, and I think that they were kind of testing the waters. I think they thought that this would go over a lot better than it did. And that was one of the things that really failed this policy, because, I've studied other authoritarian states, which are notorious for using child labor. For example, in Uzbekistan, they have child cotton pickers, and that actually stopped due to international outcry, a very rare win for human rights activists in Uzbekistan. Russia is notorious for its orphanages, which is abused and abandoned children. And the thing is like, these states usually try to cover it up. They'll do things like come out, quote the Bible, and bragging and being proud of a really vicious and inhumane policy about children. They'll be proud of a vicious and inhumane policy about adults. that people that aren't so objectively innocent and helpless. They usually do not target children as part of a propaganda initiative in this way. Like, we're harming children, yay, And that's what they were doing. And I think that, once the backlash came, they began to struggle and say, all the things you just said, it's no different from Obama, or we're not really doing it. And it's just, I don't know. I mean, it's been it's been a hard week to kind of process this. And the thing that worries me is I don't think that we're getting the full story. We still don't completely know what's happened to girls. And last night we finally found out what was happening to babies. The babies are being put in internment camps. And then today, of course, they announced that the families are going to reunite. It's not even clear whether that's technically possible after this time. Because people have been deported. There are children in America and parents in other countries, and it's a humanitarian. It's just beyond a disaster. It's one of the worst things I've seen in my lifetime. And it could have been stopped. I mean, that's what's really driving me crazy, is that, it can be stopped now. It could have been stopped before. This is why I kept saying, you need to impeach. You need to act, with a lot more determination than you're showing now. None of this wishy-washy, wow, it's almost as if Trump isn't really acting like a democratically, elected president. It's almost like he's acting like a agent of a foreign state, or someone who's just looking out for himself. You see all these sort of rhetorical flourishes, these, declarations of understatement. They won't just say, he's a liar, he's a sadist, he's a traitor. They won't just say it, and they really just need to say it, and then they need to act in the way that you would when you were dealing with that sort of individual as the president of the United States.
Yeah, I get really frustrated when I hear people be like, you're the president, act like it. And it's like, you really think, no, he's not going to do that. You don't get that by now? We're how many days into this thing? It's not going to happen. It's never going to happen. It's not like he's going to wake up and suddenly be normal. It's not going to be normal as long as he's in charge. That's the point.
Yeah, I mean, he's not. And I don't understand whether they're just playing dumb or they're genuinely dumb. But either way, they shouldn't be in this job. I mean, I basically come to that conclusion that a large number of reporters should not be working as reporters. They should go move to a different field, because they don't seem to comprehend what's happening, or they're giving him cover. And this is a time where we need clarity and truth and rigorous reporting, and they're unwilling to provide that. So.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't mean to talk about the New York Times every time we talk, but they had that Stephen Miller interview that they had audio of, and apparently then the White House raised a stink, and then they didn't play on one of their podcasts. But I don't know about you, but I thought the rules were that if you speak to a journalist into a microphone on the record, that's, fair game to be published any and everywhere.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And that's another time where they're playing dumb, and I see some reporters, the same ones that tend to boost Trump, going along with that, oh no, that doesn't necessarily mean on the record. It does, and they've openly admitted, that they are taking cues from the White House. The White House tells the New York Times what to say. The New York Times prints it, and you can find records of them doing this and admitting it going back years, whether it's their partnership with Steve Bannon with Clinton Cash, or even in smaller ways. They did a profile of Tiffany Trump back in 2016, and at the end of the profile, they had to admit that they only ran quotes approved by the Trump campaign. They only spoke to people that had been approved by the Trump campaign. The Trump campaign had provided, basically an outline of the piece, and they filled in the blanks, and they called it journalism, but it was propaganda, and they have something seriously wrong in their relationship with them. People from the Times harass me, or they get their friends to harass me whenever I point this out, but there's such a wealth of evidence, and, Miller is a key person in this. They wrote an incredibly flattering op-ed about Miller, saying he was necessary, a necessary person to contribute to the immigration debate, that he should be deciding the policy. They wrote that, and they published it on Holocaust Remembrance Day. They did this praise of a person advocating for ethnic cleansing, advocating for genocide, a person who befriends Nazis. I'm sorry, they're not stupid at the New York Times. They knew what they were doing by publishing that, and by publishing it on that day. They were basically sanctioning Nazism. They were doing a little in-joke, an incredibly cruel in-joke at anyone who might suffer under this administration, like all these migrant families do, and people in the past. And a lot of people whose ancestors died in the Holocaust were furious at the New York Times for doing this. They understood. And the Times tried to deny it. They actually wrote a bunch of nasty stuff about me when I was complaining about it. And then 2 days later, the New York Times tried to hire Quinn Norton, who is a Nazi sympathizer. She's the one who was friends with the guy with the giant swastika painted on his chest, and ultimately she did not get the job because, people felt like this was going way too far. And it just leads to this question of, why are you trying so hard to do PR for Nazis, to support white supremacists? Like, what's in it for the New York Times? Because the Trump fans are not subscribing to them. They still think it's fake news because Trump's always saying, I hate the New York Times, it's fake news, even though he loves them. And they're losing their main audience, which would be sort of anyone on the centrist to progressive spectrum that are repulsed by their embrace of Trump and by their embrace of white supremacy. So it's not serving their financial bottom line. They're destroying their reputation. And so I can only imagine that there's some sort of either a perk or a kickback that they're getting, or some sort of threat that's leveled over their head, or they just have the absolute worst judgment of any newspaper in the history of mankind, in which case, if that's what it is, then again, go find another line of work. It's just baffling.
Well, I think they're just in love with the access that they get to Trump. If they stay on his good side or whatever, and at least in private.
Well, what does that get them, though?
Right,
it hurts them financially. It doesn't get them the truth, and it leads to things like breastfeeding babies being ripped from their mothers and put in cages. The New York Times helps contribute to that. People like Maggie Haberman with their endless puff pieces and lies, their attempts to cover up the Russia scandal, they helped contribute to that. Some of these kids, who might never see their parents again, might, have had a chance had the New York Times and other media outlets actually vetted Trump, actually done their job, actually told the truth. And so I don't know how those journalists and others sleep at night. I just don't know. I would have that on my conscience until the day I died, but I'm not sure they have a conscience to have things rest done in the first place.
Right. Yeah. I think I heard Amy Goodman from Democracy Now! Describe that type of thing as the access of evil.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great phrase.
But you kind of mentioned, his authoritarian leanings, and, that brings us to the meeting with Kim Jong-un that we had. I can't believe it was only a week ago that was happening. It feels like a year, but I'm glad we're not having a nuclear war for now. I guess that's good. But I felt like that was still a bad scene, and when he gets back, he wants people to treat him like Kim's people treat him, which is because they'll be killed if they don't clap hard enough when he's in public, and he wants that for us. And really, it's the only thing that's consistent with him is admiring of these authoritarian leaders, and it's just the power that they hold, and that's the main thing that he wants that he doesn't have totally yet. So
yeah, absolutely. People rightly call it acquiescence after that meeting, but immediately I was writing, it was more than acquiescence, it was envy. He wants people to treat him like a dictator, like a ruler, like he has all-encompassing power. And then of course he made that clear after, and he does what he always does, just to say he's kidding. He's not. That's the same thing he said about Russia, when he asked them to give him Hillary Clinton's emails back in July 2016. It's a sort of de facto thing after he accidentally blurts out the truth. But, I feel like there's kind of a parallel in what happened with the North Korea summit and what's happened with the migrant children this week, which is that, they create a crisis so awful that you're waiting for the absolute worst thing to happen. In the case of North Korea, nuclear war. In the case of migrant children, sort of a possibly ethnic cleansing or genocide, or the deaths of those children, or more children being captured and separated from their parents, and so forth. And then they tamper it down. They do something else. So instead of nuclear war, we're now partnering with one of the most brutal dictators in the world. Instead of murdering the migrant children, we're going to make some sort of half-hearted attempt to reunite these families who never should have been separated to begin with. And then Trump gets praise. He gets praise from the media for making a catastrophe into a extremely bad problem, all of which is created by him and his administration. So he shouldn't be getting any credit. he should just be getting blame. But I think people are kind of locked in this cycle. They're relieved that we're not, nuking each other or something, and that relief is so palpable that it blinds their judgment, and they are, giving him credit for things that he absolutely deserves nothing but shame and blame for.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a great point too. It's like he makes everyone freaked out by threatening this horrible thing, and then we're all supposed to be glad that it's a slightly less horrible thing in the end. And it's like it's still worse than it was. Like this is still, we're still moving the Overton window or whatever that's acceptable, and it's not. We're slowly moving the goalpost down the field here, and we just don't realize it, and we're all thankful that it's not the absolute worst thing. So
yeah. But
get excited though. Space Force is coming, so I'm excited about that.
I kind of vaguely tuned out that announcement. It was like just too overwhelmed with the kids separated from parents, but I suppose is part of the point of them churning out these things. I mean, he is good at that, but I'll check up on that eventually.
Right. Well, you mentioned something else, kind of going back to the child detention centers, concentration camps, whatever, when they did that tour and they had that mural on the wall of him. What was up with that? I'm still thinking about that. That's so crazy. And it's like this weird quote from him, and it's like, what are we supposed to do with that? Who is that meant for? Like, what is going on?
Well, the quote is from The Art of the Deal, which is really disturbing because that's just one of his, his little autobiographical business guide, which goes written by Tony Schwartz, who has now announced that Trump is a sociopath and that he's known him for 30 years. But, I guess, to be fully honest, there were murals of other presidents in that same facility, of Obama with quotes from their time in office. But I think it is pointed that Trump is the first thing they see when they open the door. And, that's what I meant by saying that they are taking pride in these brutal and immoral facilities. They're painting it to be like, this is America, and America is Trump, and this is who you look at every day. You are going to look every day at the face of the man who stole you from your parents, and you're supposed to like him. You're supposed to be glad that he's giving you TV and snacks and whatever they think makes up for actual family members. And, it's sick. It reminds me very much, of things I've seen in authoritarian states, that are plastered with the billboard of the leader as children are forced to, work in fields or, sell objects on the street to survive. Like, it's horrifying. And I'm, real glad that those reporters and, those Democratic legislators were able to get in to see it. But it makes me wonder, again, like, what haven't we seen? Like, because I have a feeling that that's really, we likely saw one of the nicer facilities. And, what's happening to the girls and to others, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Right. And, we're seeing things come out now that are just kind of trickling out, like some of the kids may have been placed with sex traffickers, and we're seeing that they may have lost several thousand kids. We don't know where they are, and I think we're just, you're right, we're going to find out more and more horrible things, and it's not, we're not going to be able to fix, like, this is like broken for these people. Like, this is like, but some of these people are never going to be okay because of this. This isn't a fix, and I wish people would start to realize that when they talk about this, like, oh, we signed this executive order, it's all fixed. It's like, no, the damage is ongoing and continuous. So
they'll never recover from this. And we've had so many national discussions about trauma, about things like rape, about abandonment in the last few years, that you would hope people would grasp this. One narrative that's sort of being put out there that I really don't like is this sort of like, this is how you create a terrorist. These kids are going to grow up and they're going to attack America. I feel like that's something that possibly the Trump's camp might want us to think, and of course it's like, I would be furious at America if I were them. But what I've seen, have friends who grew up in war zones or who grew up in exile, and were psychologically traumatized, and they are, right now speaking out about this in a very forthright way, saying, yes, these children will never recover, yes, this is going to haunt them forever, but it also, it gave them insight into it. Often the people who were most accurate in their warnings about Trump were people who grew up in authoritarian states or who were exiled from them, or, a friend of mine who's a scholar who's from Bosnia, and grew up as a child in war-torn Bosnia. They understand that the worst can happen, that this cruelty is unlimited, and that what you think is unfathomable is real, and it's not history. It's not just like what happened in the Nazi era or the Soviet era. It continues to today, and it could happen anywhere, and it can happen quickly. So they all understand that, but it breaks my heart. Like, it's, of all the things that have happened under this administration, like, this is the one that's just hardest to sort of fathom, because it's just it's so preventable. There's no point to it beyond just sadism and cruelty. I mean, they say the point is deterrence, but that's not even accurate. I don't think this is going to work, because people who are coming here are doing it out of desperation. They're fleeing drug cartels and violence and wars. They're going to come anyway, and then they're going to be punished for that. And it's, I don't know. I mean, they have to get this guy out of office. They have to get people like Sessions and Miller out of office, because the more they consolidate this power, these methods will not just be limited to how they treat migrants from Central America. We're already hearing them talking about stripping citizenship away from naturalized Americans, and I think they may even extend that just to Americans that they don't like. They'll do things that are typical of authoritarian states, like fabricate crimes, plant drugs on people, whatever they need to do to get people who they find problematic out of the way. And, I'm not saying that's going to happen like next week or next month, but it is what will happen over time if they're not stopped now. And I just wish that people who did have the power to stop them grasped that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's like, even if like the just sheer horror of the thing isn't enough to move you, realize that it doesn't stop there. Just because you happen to be a white person who was born here, don't think you're safe from this, just in case you don't care about the children in whatever fashion that's happening. But you know what I mean? Like, they're going to do this to them. Yeah, guess who's next? It's you. It's everyone. They're coming for everybody. If that type of thing happens, I don't think that's alarmist to say. It's just the way things go in these situations, as you pointed out. It's just one step along the way. So
yeah, and it's frightening. It's frightening to be a parent in this environment, to know what your children might be growing up into, whether it's going to be conscription for war. People like us who've been speaking out about this. I do hope people understand that. I mean, that's one of the things that's kind of mystified me about the GOP, because a lot of people kind of dismiss them as like, okay, they're careerists, they're opportunists, they're doing this for money, they're doing this for short-term gain. And you see people retiring, this massive wave of GOP retirement, the record number, because they want to get out of this, and they just basically want to take the money and run. But I feel like they must know that they might be okay, but their kids are not going to be okay. They're going to inherit the society. Their grandkids are going to inherit this society, and they're not going to grow up safe. They're not going to grow up in a democracy with rule of law. And I'm not saying remotely that we were some ideal place before. We were a place where the rule of law was routinely abused. But we're not, we were not an authoritarian state. We were not a kleptocracy in the way that I certainly think we are now. And they won't have that safety. So you would think that just out of self-preservation for the people that they love, that they would act to end this, or at least to curb it. And instead, they're just his little lapdogs, Even the ones who really talk a big game, people like McCain, they won't vote for it. They won't vote to actually shut this down and start to turn things around. It's really on the people of the United States, and I think that's why everyone's so tired, is we've all been filling in for our officials, filling in for journalists who've screwed up on the job, like like filling in all these positions of civic duty. And it's very hard for people working 9-to-5 jobs and taking care of kids and doing all the things we do in our lives to have to do that. And I'm very grateful that people in the United States are doing this. I think public reaction has actually been very strong. But, it's unfair. I wish they would just take, some of the burden off of the rest of us. There's civic obligation, and then there's, like, civic exhaustion. And I think that's the point that we're at.
Yeah, and you keep mentioning Jeff Flake and John McCain for good reason, because they have been the ones who ever so tepidly are speaking out. But if they know better, they should do better. They should, it's on them. I don't expect Steve King of Iowa to, like, rise up in protest tomorrow. But, like, John McCain, yeah, buddy, like, and I don't get it for him either. Like, he's, no offense or anything, but he's not going to be around much longer. And wouldn't you want your final act to be final service to your country of kind of ending this? Wouldn't this be a nice way to go out?
Exactly. I mean, if I were him, the greatest service I feel like he could do now, aside from voting, which of course would be great, but just simply revealing the truth. Mm-hmm. This is a guy who does know a lot about Trump and Russia. He's someone who knows more about the former Soviet Union than most senators. Like, I remember back when I was studying Uzbekistan, John McCain was one of the very few American politicians who really understood how bad that government was, who spoke out very vehemently against authoritarianism, who spoke out about human rights. I think it's a side of John McCain that people don't necessarily know about. And I'm not saying I'm some big John McCain fan, because I disagree with, like, the vast majority of policies he's enacted and things he's voted for. But I do think he has an understanding of what's occurred. And he was very early in saying that, this is not just a bad GOP candidate. This is someone who possibly committed treason. This is someone who is hooked up with crime, and this is someone who needs to be investigated. And he would just lay out the truth. Like, it's interesting to me that there are these senators who in 2016 were very adamant that the public needed to know the truth, and it's since gone kind of silent on it. One is John McCain, who does still talk now and then the other is Harry Reid, who is, like, if I made a list of people who I think did a good job in 2016 that were, like, elected officials, the entire list is Harry Reid. Like, that's it. He tried so hard to get Comey to reveal what was going on with the FBI investigation of Trump, and he was very forthright about the threats that we faced from Trump and Russia. And then he has also gone quiet, and he has cancer, and I think that's possibly why, is that he's ailing. But I'm like, come on, man, like, just write it all out and drop it on the internet. Like, the public, Harry Reid kept saying the public needs to know. The public deserves to know. And I wish that they would just tell us, so that we have an official basically confirming the things that we already suspect and know, and giving us more to work with and to kind of unify. Because I think this sort of confusion about, what are the facts and what did Mueller find, and these little tidbits of information thrown out and often being dismissed as partisan in nature. Like, can you imagine if the two of them wrote something together? Like, that would have a momentous effect. And I kept hoping for something like that in the period immediately after the election, and just not really getting it. I was hoping that bipartisan investigation, or nonpartisan as it really should be, would bring some results. But instead, it's been 18 months, and we've just seen a consolidation of power instead.
Right. Well, and heck, hey, Harry Reid told us about the aliens before he told us about that. So, I mean, geez, what's going on?
Harry Reid knows all kinds of good shit, man. Like, Harry Reid needs to just, like, I hope he's spending his time, in recovery or whatnot, like, writing the tell-all, because he knows about the aliens. But I'm cool with that. It's just been such a crazy year that, like, I remember last year it, like, ended with, oh yeah, and aliens might be real, and everyone just kind of shrugged, because we were so damn tired that we were like, okay, fine, like, great.
Whatever, aliens real. I can't handle this right now.
I was just like, well, then have the aliens fucking do something about the, do something about the Russian investigation and the takeover of our country, because clearly Congress is not being very effective. Maybe we'll have better luck with the alien takeover. I don't know, We start hoping for strange things in this administration.
Yeah, strange times. But, well, you mentioned Comey, and he was on his book tour here. How are you feeling about Comey these days? I feel like
his book, A Higher Royalty.
Yeah,
I'm not a fan.
Not a fan.
Well, his book came out on the same day as mine, and I was very tempted to write something like on Twitter, if you want to buy a book, buy a new book today by somebody who did not tilt the election for Donald Trump, then here's mine. But then I realized he's actually on my publishing label.
That's why I was asking you about it, because I was like, Flatiron, wait a second.
She's my little buddy. So you have nothing
bad to say about him, right?
No, I think there's no problem. I don't think Flatiron cares if he's a major public figure. I'm going to say what I want. And what I want to say is that he was a really terrible head of the FBI. I don't think that means he should have been fired by Trump, because Trump admitted he was firing him in order to obstruct the Russia investigation, to get Comey off his back about Flynn and about Trump's own involvement and all these things. So he should not have been fired. But, what's very interesting to me is kind of looking at Mueller's tenure and what Mueller was looking at in the early 2010s before he left, because he gave all these speeches that were basically about this nexus between organized crime, corporate interests, and politics, and about how there were new alliances, transnational alliances between all these different groups that have brought criminal syndicates into mainstream life in a way that we've never seen before. And he warned about how profoundly it was going to affect our country and threaten our democracy, and it basically seemed as if he was predicting everything that happened in the 2016 election and with Trump back in 2011. And that's also the year that, according to the Steele dossier, the FBI had begun, looking at Trump as a Russian asset, formally labeling him as such. And so then Mueller leaves in 2013, and Comey comes in, and I'm just like, what the hell were you doing? What did you do to stop this? You had all the same information. You had tools at your disposal. You were dealing with a newly aggressive Russia. They were invading Crimea. They were hacking the shit out of us. They were hacking so many different divisions of the U.S. government, as well as our grid and private companies like Yahoo. He knew what a major threat this was. And he says, at least according to the emails released last week, that it was out of fear of public reaction from basically just asshole Republicans who themselves have no regard for fact or law or civic duty. He was so afraid of them that he decided to, go after Hillary Clinton and make sure everybody knew he was looking into her so that he didn't seem biased. And I'm like, are you, you're that afraid of Mitch McConnell? How in the world were you tasked with battling, the world's most feared mobsters when you are this much of a wuss? I mean, honestly, that was my reaction. And while of course it's bad that Comey was fired, I feel like Mueller is very capable, and I feel like Mueller has no interest in showboating or getting media attention or getting acclaim. He really does seem to genuinely want to do the job. I think he needs to do it a lot faster, but at least he seems interested in the end goal. And I don't know what the deal is with Comey. I think he was a pretty terrible FBI director, and that became clear more in retrospect. I don't think he necessarily had malicious intent, but I think that he was incompetent in ways that we just didn't know about. And that also the New York branch of the FBI, they I think, did have malicious intent, and he should have been dealing with that, with the bad actors within that department.
Right. Well, absolutely. And, if he was going to send that letter to Congress with the Anthony Weiner thing, he should have at least simultaneously said, we're also investigating Donald Trump also, but BTW.
Yeah. I mean, it wouldn't have been this big shocker. That's the thing that's so weird. It's Harry Reid had written 2 public letters to Comey, that he printed online saying, please, Comey, you have to tell people before they vote what the deal is with Trump and Russia. And also at that time, there were tons of articles about Trump's relationship with Russia. I know because I wrote some of them, but also, they were this is a topic of the debate. Hillary Clinton, campaigned about this. She spoke about this in speeches. She talked to Trump directly about him being a Putin puppet on the stage. So if Comey were to come out and confirm, that Trump had an illicit relationship with the Kremlin and with the Russian mafia, and that his campaign had been illicitly involved, it wouldn't have been this huge, shocking thing in the way that people kind of try to make it look like now. They try to make it look like this was all, buried at the time. It really wasn't. It was actively being suppressed and played down, but it was out there, and it would have really, really helped that he decided to go the other direction instead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Well, on a different note, I saw you were getting into the podcasting games. I'm excited about that.
I'm so shocked by how many people retweeted that tweet where I announced I had no idea because, I'm doing a podcast called Gaslit Nation with my friend Andrea Halupa, who also studies authoritarian states. Her specialty is Ukraine and, Soviet history, and, she's also interested in contemporary American stuff, and she's been somebody who's, been, we've been hashing out Trump and the election for like 2 years, and so we finally decided, we should do a podcast, and we're working with Dame Magazine, which is great, because often, women are left out of this kind of political, punditry game, and we're doing it twice a month, kind of trying to go deep into a lot of these structural issues behind Trump's administration and campaign. It's not going to be a kind of like reaction to the, news of the minute, but, looking back in time, giving some context and history, and hopefully it'll be good. I feel a little nervous now because I think expectations are high because people are like, oh, thank God. And I'm like, oh God, this is just like a twice monthly podcast. Don't go too crazy here, but it should be good. We'll see. I think it's supposed to come out July 9th.
July 9th. Awesome. Cool.
Yeah,
cool.
That'll be good.
Awesome.
We just recorded it 2 days ago.
Cool. Now, you guys are in different cities, right?
Yeah. She came to St. Louis to do it, and then she lives in New York, and, I'm going to head down to New York probably in August to do it. And because it is this, it's basically work that we hope stands the test of time, we can kind of space them out, record them in advance, and then drop them. Like the first couple are kind of an overlook of 2016 and this process of gaslighting, like how propaganda was spread, how it was made to be effective, and how did this campaign play out. And we focus a lot on Manafort because we know that our podcast is going to drop right before his trial, and also Andrea is an expert on Ukraine, and for her, the minute that Manafort was selected as Trump's campaign advisor, she was like, oh my God, like, you've got to be kidding me, like, this guy is probably working for the Kremlin. She saw it very early, and people thought she was crazy. They wanted to give her an intervention, like they really thought she'd lost her mind, but she was absolutely right. And that was also what alarmed me as well. I mean, not exactly because of Russia, but because he was a well-known mobster and dictator lackey. Like, if you study human rights, you knew about Paul Manafort, and it just kind of confirmed in my wants to rule America like autocrat, which, was evident also from Trump's speeches, but it was like, okay, he's now obtained institutional support and advice from someone who really knows how to do that, how to take a democracy and turn it into a kleptocracy or an autocracy. And that was what I think, Paul Manafort's role was. But then, of course, it turned out to be even worse than that because the relationship is so deep and so complicated.
Is in deep debt with Oleg Deripaska.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he's a train wreck. It's amazing to me how someone who's led this life of crime, consequence-free, can be just so inept at the most basic level, like converting Word documents to PDFs, like, intimidating witnesses while under house arrest. And maybe that's why. Maybe it's because he's been able to act with such impunity for so long that he just assumes nothing will affect him, not his massive debt, not the fact that he's put himself out in the spotlight. And, one thing Andrea points out in our podcast is how he basically was indicating that certain states were, rigged and going to go for Trump. I mean, he obviously doesn't use the word rigged, but, tweets these sort of cryptic remarks shortly before the election that kind of, in retrospect, look damning, look like he can't resist bragging that they were pulling this little operation off. And so I think that's his weakness. That's the weakness of all of them, is this vanity that comes from living life consequence-free.
Right. Well, absolutely. Do you think he's just Manafort? Do you think he's hoping for a presidential pardon at this point, or what do you think his hope is? I mean... Oh,
yeah, I think he is. I mean, everyone keeps saying he's going to flip. I find that very hard to imagine. I mean, I think he's kind of a, old school omerta kind of guy. I think he's placing his bets, and he's placed his bet on consolidation of power for Trump, and Trump is sending out that signal through pardoning all of these incredibly horrible people. And of course, people like Scooter Libby, who were indicted for similar reasons. That's a signal to Manafort and to Michael Cohen and to others to not rat him out, to not give out the game that Trump still thinks he's going to win. And that might just be bravado, because Trump always acts like he's going to win. That's a lifelong character trait. And Manafort also does, but I don't know. I mean, if he were to slip, I don't know what you would do. I guess maybe witness protection, because so many people would want to kill him. Americans, Russians, like everyone would want to kill Paul Manafort, that I have the feeling he'd be more likely to just refuse to cooperate and hope that we become a full-blown dictatorship and that he'll be rewarded for his loyalty.
Yeah, Michael Flynn, Michael Cohen, all those guys, those guys are flipping. I don't think Paul Manafort is scared of way more scary people than Donald Trump.
Well, I don't know about Cohen. I'm still trying.
Oh, you don't think so?
I'm not sure. I feel like he might be fronting. I feel like he'd be like putting on a kind of playing both sides, basically, like trying to seem cooperative. Now he's condemning Trump's policies to try to seem nice.
Which was hilarious. It's okay, dude, a little late.
He's such a brutal asshole. He's this dude who's known for like threatening people all the time on Trump's behalf, and now he's suddenly like concerned for the welfare of children. I mean, maybe it's just such a horrific policy that even Michael Cohen is objecting. But yeah, I think it's hard to tell with him. I think he's weighing options in his mind as well.
For sure. Now I saw you've also got two more books coming out. So what can you tell us about those?
No, because I'm not quite sure what I'm going to say. That's the thing, I'm very happy that I have a 2-book deal with Flatiron. The second book, I definitely don't know what's going to be in it, because it's going to be written after the 2020 election, assuming we have one. So that's really a blank slate. The first one, is going to go into the issues that I talk about routinely, democracy and the shift to autocracy, and kind of a long-term view of how we got there as a country, and how we can get out, mixed with different components. I mean, I'm like a weird writer. I mean, this drove my dissertation advisor crazy, because like I don't outline, I don't plan. I just sit and I write. And people who trust me know they'll get a good product in the end. They know that it'll work out fine. But they also know that's just like the way my mind works. And so, Byron fully trusts that I've been writing so much on these topics that it'll come to me. Like I know what I want to say in my mind. Like I'm always writing the outline out in my mind, but if I were to try to explain it, I think I'd either, do myself a disservice or just not, capture it well or put out spoilers, or I don't know. It'll be cool though. I promise you it'll be cool.
Okay.
That's really all I can
say. All right, I'm in. I'll read whatever it is, but but yeah, I often think I don't even know if I could write anything if we still had to use typewriters, because you know what I mean. Like you really have to know what you're going to say before you start clicking and clacking. But computer, it's like copy, paste, cut, edit. I don't know. It's going here. It's going there.
No, I write really weird. I always write like I write the drafts kind of as it goes. I don't do like a first draft and then reread it and then edit it. I like do a paragraph and then I like rewrite it until it's perfect, and then I just keep going. And and of course in the end you go back and you fix things and you make sure it flows and everything. But that's always how I worked. And in school, I remember having to like fake a bad first draft. Like I'd write the whole paper and then they're like, "We want the first draft. We can give you feedback." And so I'd write something with like spelling errors and stupid sentences in it so that the teacher would have something to do. God, this sounds so obnoxious. I'm like listening to myself. Sorry, but that's just this is the way I work. Like everyone works differently, and hopefully they'll be accepting of the way I work as we roll along. Because obviously this first book was totally random and weird. I mean, it was a compilation of essays. It's a very different format for me.
Right. So you're going on vacation next week. Where are you going?
Driving west. Rocky Mountains, and hopefully go out to Moab and Utah. And like my kids have never seen mountains before, and they've seen some kind of like deserty kind of landscape. I've never seen that part of Utah before, and we're going to basically go see some national parks before they get destroyed by the Trump administration. And I'm hoping to take like a bit of a break from the news, but obviously it's this is a very difficult time to do that. because I'm concerned about the migrant kid situation. It's not like I can kind of turn off the part of my brain that worries about that. But I am glad to see that, so many people are, taking charge on this issue and really working to try to help them and on other things. So, everyone keeps saying, like, take your days off. Like, you always cancel your vacations because something happens. Someone always gets fired or some horrible thing. Like, I just know they're going to, like, fire Rosenstein or something on Friday. Like, I just know it, just to mess with my vacation. But, I think it's necessary. You can probably hear the burnout in my voice.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Well, hey, thank you for your work, and keep doing what you're doing, but don't wear yourself out for sure. But so take it easy, have a good vacation, and have a good night.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for talking to me.
Oh, no problem. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. If you enjoy this podcast, there are several ways to support it. Join the Rob Burgess Show mailing list. Go to tinyletter.com/The Rob Burgess Show and type in your email address. Then respond to the automatic message. I have a Patreon account, which can be found at patreon.com/Rob Burgess Show Patreon. I hope you'll consider supporting in any amount. Also, please make sure to comment, follow, like, subscribe, share, rate, and review everywhere the podcast is available, including iTunes, YouTube, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play Music, Facebook, Twitter, Internet Archive, TuneIn, and RSS. The official website for the podcast is www.therobburgessshow.com. You can find out more about me by visiting my website, www.thisburgess.com.
And if you have something to say, record a voice memo on your smartphone and send it to therobburgessshow@gmail.com. Include voice memo in the subject line of the email. Until next time.